Question Time.
Tonight we're in Bury St Edmunds, and welcome to Question Time. And with me tonight, the government's Culture Secretary, also responsible for media, digital and sport, once an economist at the Bank of England, Matt Hancock. An MP for more than 30 years, one of Jeremy Corbyn's closest allies, the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. The only Green Party politician to have succeeded in becoming an MP, the co-leader of her party, Caroline Lucas. An Australian-born human rights lawyer who represents the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, Jen Robinson, and a comedian whose material includes economics and politics and who supports Brexit, Simon Evans. Good, and you can of course join in the debate from home if you still dare to use social media. Our hashtag is BBCQT. Our first question from Isabel Moyer, please. Isabel.
Should Amber Rudd resign or be sacked?
Caroline Lucas.
Well, certainly one or the other, and if she won't resign, then she should be sacked. I think the Home Office is completely out of control. I think that it is making cruel and callous decisions. I think that there are Kafkaesque demands being made on people for paperwork and so on. So I think there's every reason to suggest that she doesn't seem to have any idea about what's going on in her own department. Watching her in the Select Committee yesterday was absolutely painful, where question after question she didn't know, and in particular not to know that there is a real systemic problem here. To me, is incomprehensible. Every single MP knows that there is a systemic problem. Anyone who has tried to contact the Home Office knows there's a systemic problem. So I think she should go, but I think that's not enough. I think we need to have a root and branch transformation of the Home Office. I think we need a commission of inquiry to find out exactly what is going on there, because it isn't just the Windrush generation, sadly. It is so many people who have tried to interface with the Home Office and find themselves treated with contempt, frankly. There's no other word for it. You know, time and again, I've tried to contact the Home Office on behalf of my constituents, and you wait for months and months, if not years, actually, frankly, sometimes, trying to get a decent answer out of them. People deserve better. So yes, she should go. The Home Office itself needs to have a root and branch transformation. But there's also something about the culture as a whole. And I just want to say one thing there, that, you know, this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at a time when immigrants are vilified over and again by our tabloid media, by the way in which the government tried to make landlords into kind of border guards. This is not happening by accident. What happened in the Home Office didn't happen by accident. It was a deliberate policy. It was an obvious outcome of this hostile environment, a hostile environment which Amber Rudd herself has said she wants to make even more hostile. She wants to speed up and get rid of even more people. And this way in which, well, just the last thing, just to say the way in which Theresa May has tried to pretend that this is only an issue for illegal migrants, I think is just disingenuous, because we know that the net removal targets created a culture in the Home Office itself where there was an incentive on people, if a psychological one, if not anything worse, to refuse people who have every right to be here. I think this is a real stain on our country, and at the very least, Amber Rudd should go.
Matt Hancock?
No, she shouldn't. And there's a reason that she shouldn't, which is that after what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and in particular after the revelations about the Windrush generation, the most important thing that we must do now is make sure that we put the system right for the future. And Amber Rudd came out early to apologise wholeheartedly for the problems that had been brought to light with those who'd come to this country in the Windrush generation. And in a sense, the words at the moment don't matter. What matters is that we get the actions right to put the system right. People were invited here, and they are British, and they are of course, they have every right to remain here, and we need to make sure that they have the documentary proof of that.
How do they get that if it's
welcome.
been abolished? Sorry, just to interrupt you. How do they get the documentary proof if it doesn't exist?
Well, we've put a team in place now to make sure that we can get this right for the future, for those who came before 1973, for the Windrush generation who were invited here. And the crucial thing is this. We've got to make sure that this country is gregarious, outward-looking, that people, everybody who lives here and has a right to live here feels welcome here. And this means solving some deep-seated problems that have gone on for some time.
What about what Caroline Lucas said about Amber Rudd's performance? She said yesterday we don't have targets for removals. It then turns out today that you did have targets for removals. It's that kind of thing, isn't it, that makes people think she's not up to the job?
Well, there's localised targets. There's no Home Office policy for targets that get ahead of a decision about an individual. There are rules about immigration.
What's a target then?
But it's very important that we have rules and control over immigration, and that those rules are both allow that control, but are also fair. And Amber Rudd's instincts are right on this, and I have every confidence that she'll be able to put it right. And what matters now is that we get the system right for the future.
All right, well, we'll go back to targets perhaps in a moment. Diane Abbott.
Of course, Amber Rudd should go, and I'll tell you why. That Windrush generation, who people are shedding crocodile tears about now, I knew that generation. It was my parents' generation. There is no more patriotic group of people. There was no more harder working cohort of people. And the way they have been treated is shameful. And let me say this about Amber Rudd. Matt is saying, oh, it's a recent revelation. In 2014, when Theresa May was Home Secretary, she changed the law to remove the protection from Commonwealth citizens. And I voted against that change, and I stood up in the House and prophesied what would happen to British people who people just assumed were immigrants. It's not a recent revelation. She's only done anything because it became a scandal in the newspapers. She has to go. How can you expect Commonwealth citizens to have any confidence in this government if Amber Rudd is allowed to get away with prevaricating, get away with saying one thing one day, the other the next day? We owe it to a group of people who helped to build this country to make sure that Amber Rudd goes.
Matt, how can you say that words don't matter and an apology from Amber Rudd makes everything okay when you just say to yourself, action needs to happen? The words Amber Rudd has said clearly have been dishonest over the last couple of days regarding the targets. So if actions are going to happen, surely Amber Rudd needs to go, and these actions need to come by someone new in the Home Office.
And you, sir, in the front here.
I think we're in danger of losing sight of what is quite an important issue. Obviously, the Windrush scandal is a scandal, but actually I think there is a need to look at the number of illegal immigrants and generally migration into the UK. There was an article recently in the paper, obviously Boris Johnson wants to have this amnesty, suggesting there's between 500,000 and 700,000 illegal immigrants in the United Kingdom that the Home Office presumably don't know about. I feel we need to make sure we're actually doing something about that and not losing sight of that in the scandal that's arisen.
OK. I'll come to you. Jen Robinson.
I absolutely agree that the apologies are not enough, and Amber Rudd has a lot to answer for, but so does Theresa May. She knew about this in 2014. There was a legal action group report in 2014 which reported on all of these stories. And instead of taking action on the stories and implementing recommendations that are now being implemented to protect the Windrush generation, she instead implemented more reforms, more hostile environment reforms, to make it worse. So these apologies to me are empty words. This action could have been taken a long time ago. And as a fellow Commonwealth citizen who has chosen to come and live in this country, to work in this country, It is utterly offensive to me and unfair that people that have lived here for 4 times longer than I have are being denied their ability to stay. They have contributed to this country, they have paid taxes in this country, and it is a terrible reflection on Britain and its leadership in the Commonwealth to have treated Commonwealth citizens like this who have developed and contributed to the wealth and prosperity of this country, and it has to change.
Okay. The man in the pink shirt there, you see.
It would be a clear indication of it being the immigration policy and not thinking about the policy, not the individuals concerned. It would appear that Amber Rudd and the Home Office in 2016 made the decision that the people wanted immigration control, but didn't think about the impact on the individuals. Therefore, Amber Rudd is responsible for the Home Office, and ultimately she has completely misjudged the mood of the people.
Do you think illegal immigrants should be removed?
I do.
Simon Evans.
Well, it certainly does appear to be very nearly a perfect storm, doesn't it, for the Tory party, with Amber Rudd, the current incumbent, but the Prime Minister, the previous incumbent. It couldn't be set up very much more neatly than that if you wanted to bring them down. I think you would struggle to find anyone who would say on record that they don't feel a certain amount of shame about the whole episode, as Diana said, and I don't think, again, anyone will quibble. These are not people who should be regarded in terms of immigrants, illegal or otherwise. They're citizens, they're British. And it's an extraordinary litany of incompetence. I think, in terms of whether she should resign or not, I can give you my personal opinion, my gut reaction, which is fairly worthless. I would say it probably depends really not on whether we wish to see retribution, but whether Amber Rudd staying in place is most likely to see the necessary reforms take place as quickly as possible, or whether her going is more likely to see that. But what I will say, I think, is this, that there have been decades of confusion and dishonesty in immigration policy in this country. Under Tony Blair, there were many years in which immigration was concealed from the British public. When they discovered that, their anger was harnessed by the Tory government, who then instituted this climate of hostility, which has in turn swung far too far in the other direction and created its own problems. We need transparency. The British people are entitled to say what they want to see their government do on this, and we need to see a government that is willing to institute that and not try and, disguise what their true intent and actions are.
Okay. Do you agree with Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, that there should be an amnesty for illegal immigrants who are here, who've been here for 10 years?
No, I don't. And I think it's very important in this discussion to distinguish between the need to tackle illegal immigration and to make sure that the rules are abided by. Illegal immigration has some terrible impacts on people, affects some of the most vulnerable people who are here in this country. We need to make sure that we tackle illegal immigration and abide by the rules. But the thing about the Windrush generation is that they had every right to be here because we invited them here, and they're British. That is why it's so important that we put this right and put it right properly and for good now.
Diane, do you believe? Do you believe there should be an amnesty for people who've been in this country illegally for 10 years?
No, I don't. And one of the things I don't like, though, is how people confuse the issue of illegal immigrants with the issue of the Windrush generation. They were not immigrants. They were Commonwealth citizens who've been treated very poorly. And, we're not just talking about, they couldn't get a piece of paper, they couldn't get treatment for cancer, they couldn't come back to this country when they went back to the Caribbean for a wedding. So some of them were thrown out of their house, others lost their jobs. This is one of the biggest scandals in the Home Office for some time. So let's not confuse it with the issue of illegal immigration. And as for this idea that Tony Blair brought in immigrants and they were hidden from the British people, if immigrants were hidden from the British people, I don't know what all those people walking around London are. I mean, it's just absurd to talk in conspiratorial terms. This is an issue of right and wrong. The Windrush generation were treated in a wrong way, and we have to make it good.
I'll come to you in a moment. As Shadow Home Secretary, what is Labour's policy on illegal immigrants?
Because I've been an MP for a few years, I know what tragic lives a lot of illegal immigrants live. They live in fear. If they're women, they can be subject to domestic violence. So we would want to bear down on the numbers of illegal immigrants. We are not talking about wanting illegal immigrants. I'm talking about having a fair and transparent and efficient system.
Can I just say that I don't think that our current system in any shape or form is fair. And I think one of the things that's
I'm not
particularly
saying
unfair...
that.
No, I know you're not, but I'm just saying that this is going wider than just Windrush, because I think one of the very unfair things about our current system is, for example, if you want to marry and bring in someone from a country outside of the EU, you have to have a salary of over £18,600. Now, that is just simply unfair. 47% of the population are not going to earn enough money to be able to bring in a wife or a husband from a country outside of the EU. How on earth is that a fair system? How is it fair when I've got a constituent who's been trying to find out why he's not allowed to join a British wife? He's been told that he somehow didn't turn up often enough to the immigration centre to provide evidence, but he's not given any information about what he's done wrong. And that's why it is Kafkaesque when you've got people who are being told they've done something wrong in their past, which is why they're not now allowed to stay, but they're not being told what it is. I've been trying to find out since July of last year. I've written letters, parliamentary questions, and there's just no answer.
I think, frankly, Matt Hancock saying that words aren't relevant and don't matter is completely shameful, because that creates the whole rhetoric around this idea of immigration. Having vans in the road saying, go home, like, to anyone that wasn't born here, that says go home, even if they aren't here illegally. The words create the whole rhetoric around it and create a whole feeling within the nation that is then put on everyone who wasn't born here or who doesn't have British citizenship and is given indefinite leave to remain. And how can we trust that that really means indefinite leave to remain after this entire scandal? Words create the rhetoric, which has the effect on the people that are working in your NHS to serve you and treat you, and working, paying taxes to finance the building that you work in. I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
Were the vans... I'll come to you up there. Were the vans a mistake, Matt Hancock?
Yes, and what I'd say on is what my point was.
Whose responsibility are they?
My point.
Whose responsibility were they?
Well, they were the government's
Secretaries.
responsibility at the time. The government in which I serve, and I accept the anger, and I acknowledge the anger, and I think that the anger that we've seen over this is justified. And the point I was making is that words alone won't solve this. What matters is the action that we take now to solve the problem,
no, but, sorry,
and getting it right.
I don't want to interrupt you, but your words you say won't solve it, but words, she was saying, created the problem in part, because using the words go home, and if you know somebody who's illegal, ring this number and all that.
I was talking in respect to the response
but
now.
you were against that policy,
I'm talking,
which was the present Prime Minister's policy.
I'm talking about the response now.
I know you are, but I'm asking you about what she said.
Well, I think that if you let me finish, the response now, words alone are not enough. What we need is action. That was the point I was making. With respect to the vans that drove around, they were taken off the streets, and the reason is because that was a wrong decision, wrong thing to do.
Man up there.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I may, just go back to what Diane Abbott said with regards to viewing illegal immigrants, and she talked about the problems with sending them back. For example, women, they might be victimised. Does that mean then that you are okay with sending certain illegal immigrants back, but only keeping the ones that we feel empathy for and feel bad for? Is that the criteria you're setting for it? Because if we feel bad for people we're bringing in, it's like, oh, okay, that's okay, because we feel bad for them and that's wrong. But if there's no level of kind of empathy or sympathy for their situation, that's fine, we can get them back. It's just as long as we can do what we want, as long as it doesn't make us feel bad.
What I was saying is that I would not lightly condone a situation which created illegal immigrants as such, because after decades as a constituency member of parliament, I've seen all the misery that illegal immigrants go through. If you really want to know what I'm saying as Shadow Home Secretary, we need to change the conversation on immigration. We need to have a fairer system, a more transparent system, a system that works in its own terms. But above all, we need to change the narrative, a narrative which says that immigrants are somehow always a problem, always a drain. Anything you do to them, you know, it doesn't really matter. And the thing about the Windrush scandal, I think it's made a lot of people think again about immigration and about the absolutely ramshackle immigration system we have in this country.
We've had a 20-year period in which no politician of any party has stood up and made the case for positive immigration. Is it little wonder that the civil servants who have to execute the policy get confused between legal and illegal immigrants? All of you are to blame. This is not a party matter. Every politician in this country for 20 years has ducked the issue.
And you down here. I was going to come to you a moment ago. Sorry, John. Can you get to, yes.
Okay, so the point that I want to make really is about making people feel welcome. So I came to the UK in 1973, and I have held a British passport now for more than 30 years. But every time I go to renew it, I'm always reminded that it's actually not worth the same as someone else's British passport, because I always have to prove that I'm a British citizen, in spite of having a British passport. So I don't feel welcome when I come to renew it.
Want to come in on this?
The problem is, if people mingle into society, having arrived legitimately, it is quite difficult. And of course, what the government has done, probably because we have not been willing to pay sufficient amounts of tax in order to fund them properly for decades, what the government has done is tried to use very blunt instruments like racist vans to make these people go home in much the same way that the BBC would drive around and make you believe that that weird thing with a radar on the roof actually knew if you were watching a telly without a licence. I mean, it was absurd. But they try and scare you into this stuff, you know, because what would actually solve the problem would be a decently well-equipped and well-informed service.
Can I just say one thing, sorry, because we were accused, all of us, of being anti-immigrant.
Be very brief, Caroline,
so very briefly, the Green Party is proud to say that we want to have a Windrush Day. We want to celebrate the contribution of immigrants. And I'm also proud to say, sir, that the Green Party has always stood up for freedom of movement, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. So, before we take the next question, we're going to be in St Albans next Thursday. The week after that in Kettering. On the screen are the details of how to apply, and as ever, I'll give them at the end. Julie Pearce, can we have your question?
Why does Labour have such a problem with anti-Semitism?
Jen Robinson.
Look, I think anti-Semitism is... I'm not sure that it's a problem just with the Labour Party. It is a problem across our society. Anti-Semitism is an awful form of racism, and one that must be rooted out from across the political spectrum, whether the Labour Party, the Conservatives, and across society. It is, unfortunately, a particular form of racism that has deep roots in Western society, and we must continue to be vigilant about seeing the new forms it takes and making sure we take action. It is not a smear, I would say, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about this week. It is not a smear to call out anti-Semitism. It must be called out in all contexts, in all circumstances, against all parties, on its own terms. These phrases are often used for political ends, but it must always be called out, and we have a responsibility to do so. And I think the Labour Party has done the right thing by trying to sit down and listen to those who are affected, to sit down with the Jewish community and listen to their complaints, and that's the first step towards finding a solution. Of course it could be done better, and there have been some excellent suggestions from the Jewish community, including expediting complaints, which I think would go a long way to to assuaging the community and assuring them that action is being taken and that must be implemented. And I'm sure it would be much better for both those accused of it and those who have suffered it that these complaints are dealt with much faster. Okay. But to say it's just a problem in the Labor Party, I don't think that's correct.
Okay, you say.
I would just like to say that generally through looking through Labour's experience with anti-Semitism, what I found was that it was less anti-Semitism and more based around anti-Israel policy. I feel like that's kind of understated when people talk about anti-Semitism, and they kind of mix the two things up very...
Matt Hancock, do you believe Labour has a problem with anti-Semitism, as Julie Pearce is asking? Why does Labour have such a problem?
Well, there's clearly a problem, and they've admitted it. And anti-Semitism is wrong. It's a horrific form of racism, and we've seen the horrors that it can lead to. But I think that I very much hope that the Labour Party is now getting a grip on it, and I wish Diane and Jeremy Corbyn well in their efforts to do so. But it is clearly a sore that needs to be sorted out. I'm worried that it's part of a wider issue that I have a big concern about, which is the whole political discourse is harsher and more unpleasant, and there's more bullying than there used to be. Yes, there's the anti-Semitism issue in the Labour Party, but it's that it's harder to have a reasonable debate. You know, and that debate that we need to have has to be based on mutual respect of people who disagree. You know, I disagree with Diane on lots of things, but I have huge respect for her 30 years in public life and what she's stood for. And I hope that we can somehow get back to a better quality debate where we have discussions on the issues and we try to get rid of some of the bullying and the anti-Semitism that we've seen and that seems to have got worse in the last few years.
All right. The woman in blue had her hand up. Yes. Yes.
While I agree that anti-Semitism isn't totally the unique property of the Labour Party, and we do have an anti-Semitism problem a little bit in the whole of the society, just as we have some racism in the whole of society, you can't deny that it's a much more profound and extreme problem with Labour. And I think that goes back to what somebody over there said, that some people in the far left, Corbyn, and the people in the far left of Labour have a problem with Israel. And I just wonder why they always set Israel up as the kind of hate state. And you look at, OK, the way they've treated the Palestinians, but Turkey has treated the Kurds terribly. Syria has, bombed its own people. We think used chemical weapons against its own people. Lots of states, especially in the Middle East, do atrocious things, including Israel. But we don't hear Corbyn or the far left criticise them. It's always Israel. And you've got to think, why? Well, Israel is the only Jewish state in the world, and those others are not Jewish states.
Diane Abbott.
I take anti-Semitism very seriously, partly because I've literally spent a lifetime fighting racism, anti-Semitism and discrimination of all sorts, but partly because in Hackney I have one of the oldest Jewish communities in the country, and I respect that history, I honour that history, and the links between the Jewish community and the Labour movement go back a century. But there's clearly a problem in Labour that the party hasn't tackled properly. We are moving forward now. We've got a new General Secretary. We're bringing a team of lawyers. We're going to resolve the most serious cases, including Ken Livingstone, by July. But I would say this, because I take anti-Semitism very seriously, for instance, in my constituency, I have a community of Haredi Jews that are actually subject to hate crime more than other Jews because, they wear that costume, they walk to synagogue. But because I take it seriously, I hope people aren't going to make it some kind of party political game. Anti-Semitism is wrong. I fought it all my life. I'm glad that we're acknowledging in the party that there's more that we could do. But if we just make that issue of racism and anti-Semitism descend to some party political game, we're not doing the seriousness of the issue justice.
When you said a couple of years back that it was a smear against ordinary party members to say the Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism, which you said to Andrew Marr, I think it was, do you still feel that it's that, like Len McCluskey said, that people who go in on anti-Semitism are actually smearing Corbyn and smearing the party?
Anti-Semitic views are confined to a tiny minority in society and a tiny minority in the Labour Party, but they're undeniable and they're horrific. And I took part in a debate, I think it was last week, where a number of MPs on both sides spoke about their personal experiences, and that was very moving. But the idea that there is much more anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and none in any other party, that can't be right.
Simon Evans.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think I can understand why Diane is saying that. And certainly, I think historically, parties have taken advantage of an unfortunate tendency or a slip of the tongue or something to pounce. And certainly divisions within parties have tried to gain ascendancy within their own party off the back of that. But I really don't think you can regard this present circumstance as an example of that. I think it is... I mean, to be honest, it was almost, if it wasn't so serious, it was genuinely quite comical at one point. Ken Livingstone couldn't appear on camera without talking about Hitler, and it just became quite laughable. But I think what we really have here, more than anything else, if you want to approach it and say root it out, what we have is a problem that Jeremy Corbyn has with specifically addressing specific issues which he is being asked to do. He did it again with the IRA, of course. He has referred, and there was a time, of course, when he was on the backbenches, and in my view, he was very well suited to that situation. You know, the Labour Party has a long and, frankly, quite worthwhile history of supporting the rights of dispossessed and oppressed Palestinian peoples. I happen to go to university with somebody who worked with the Labour Party for several years on that campaign, and, you know, in that sense and in that particular regard, Israel was seen as a uniquely hostile presence within the Middle East. You're absolutely right, the lady in the blue shirt. It does seem to get attacked a good deal more than other Middle Eastern countries for what are not uniquely hostile activities, but it has a unique history, I suppose, and this does tend to, you know, because it moved in onto somebody else's territory. But the reality is Jeremy Corbyn has had the opportunity to deal with this, and he has flunked again and again and again, and he has allowed this smouldering, you know, bushfire to just rage now, and it's in serious danger of splitting the party in two. I honestly would not be remotely surprised to see that happen now.
Sadly, regardless of what Diane Abbott said, and I used to live in Hackney, there is a perception now that the Labour Party is becoming more and more anti-Semitic, and as the gentleman said, it is a smouldering fire which must be stamped out, and it almost seems like the leader, Mr Corbyn, is reluctant to take the issue. We're in a town where Magna Carta was born 800 years ago. There's a Jewish memorial in the town centre back to 1109 for 57 Jews that were murdered. We all know what happened 80 years ago when there was another anti-Semitic thing and it ended up in the Holocaust. This is 2018. The Labour Party needs to get a grip of this and stamp it out once and for all.
Caroline Lucas.
Well, I think anti-Semitism is a stain on our society. I think it is a particularly disgusting form of racism, and the fact that you have Jewish schools now that have to have guards outside them, I think is truly shocking. But I think as well that we shouldn't be playing politics with it. I think that there is anti-Semitism in society. We can never say it's gone, so we have to keep fighting it whenever we see it. But the point I wanted to pick up actually was the point that's been made by a couple of people in the audience about this issue of whether or not the left is more anti-Israel. And I think we have to be so careful in what we mean and how we say it. I'm not anti-Israel, but I am sometimes very critical of the actions of the Israeli authorities, quite often the illegal actions of the Israeli authorities in Palestine. And I do get very frustrated that quite often that isn't called out when there are, for example, more homes being built on the occupied territories against UN laws, when there are housing being demolished, when the wall is being built in a way that basically cuts Palestinian farmers off from their land. I don't think we should be afraid of being able to say those things in a way that is not anti-Semitic. We're not saying anything about Jews, we are saying something about the policies of the Israeli government and the Israeli authorities. And I think making that distinction is hugely, hugely important.
Just before we leave this, what did you mean when you said it's not something that people should play politics about? What are you alleging there?
Well, what I'm observing is that there's been an awful lot of focus on Diane and the Labour Party, and I don't believe that anti-Semitism is solely the preserve of the Labour Party. I think it is in society, so it'll be in all of our parties, and therefore it is for all of us to be on our guard, to put in place as many structures, policies, processes, education and so forth to make sure it is stamped out, rather than just thinking, well, it's a problem for someone else over there and they need to sort it out. We all need to sort it out.
It was a Union leader, Len McCluskey, who said there'd been sustained smearing within Labour of Corbyn talking about...
I don't think that was a helpful comment for him to make.
And also, he entirely supports what Jeremy's trying to do on anti-Semitism. When he was talking about smearing, he was talking about a range of issues. And if you want to know more about what he was saying, perhaps you should interview him.
Interview him? He does come on this programme. He does come on this programme. We also all read his article in the New Statesman. So there we are. Let's move on. Let's have a question from Eloise Carter, please. Eloise.
Is it not time that as a nation we accept Donald Trump as President of America instead of continually knocking him down?
OK. Who would like to go on this? Simon Evans, you start on this one.
Well, I suspect David has chosen me because I was on the News Quiz, a Radio 4 programme, a couple of months ago, and I spoke in support of Donald Trump's achievements.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't? OK.
No, I didn't know. No. So you can do it all again, fresh.
In front of a Radio 4 comedy audience, I don't think as much oxygen has been sucked out of the room in as short a period of time for quite some... It was a bit tongue-in-cheek. He's not my guy. He's not my choice of president. I preferred the smooth panache of Barack Obama to the brash, vulgarian, short-fingered buffoon. But I do think the lady who asked the question has a very good point. I think if you look objectively at Trump's administration so far, it has certainly not been the car crash that was anticipated by many of what Michael Gove would call experts. Paul Krugman, for instance, a Nobel Prize-winning Keynesian economist, anticipated that the US economy would be absolutely on the floor by the end of the first year of his administration. He said, quite categorically, it will tank. The stock market will tank, the economy will tank, jobs... The exact opposite has happened, as I'm sure everyone in this room is aware. The stock market has had record gains. Unemployment is very low, including insignificantly among the black population in America have benefited in employment terms. Obviously, there are all kinds of complexities, nuances and details, and obviously certain aspects of his manner are anathema to our perhaps rather sort of elder statesman. I saw somebody recently in a newspaper say that we have in this country always rather like to regard ourselves as Greece to New York to Rome, meaning that we are the intellectuals and that they are, And in fact, they said, the truth is that political discourse is continued at a far higher level, a more intellectually and philosophically ambitious level in America. And Donald Trump is just a strange outlier outside of all of that, and they're all appalled by him in that respect. But the truth is, America is actually doing okay at the moment. And to be honest, I suspect Donald Trump's instincts in the Middle East were probably better than those to which his administration has forced him into in recent months as well. So yes, I think in short it is about time we just grew up, welcomed him here without covering him in eggs and rotten tomatoes, whatever some people have in store for him, and try to do business with what is quite clearly a very important ally in a post-Brexit world.
Okay. He's... He is, of course, coming here. It was announced today in July, Friday, July the 13th, a lucky Friday. Jen Robinson.
Donald Trump is not our president, though sometimes you might wonder, given the decisions that this government makes, to do his bidding at the first ask.
What are you thinking of there?
Bombing Syria, for example. We do not have to accept him. He is not our president. We don't get to vote in the US. And it's important because the rest of the world is always affected by US policymaking, and we must continue to be critical of the decisions that the US government makes. We don't get to vote, but they affect us. Now, on free speech, Donald Trump has had has been taking terrible positions, and I speak with this with personal experience representing someone who is inside an embassy in this country because of this government's refusal to provide an assurance against extradition to the US. Now, should we be extraditing a publisher to the US to face prosecution for publishing information? People say, well, Donald Trump tweeted, "I love WikiLeaks." The US CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, who is now the Secretary of State, said that WikiLeaks is a hostile non-state intelligence agency and should not benefit from First Amendment protections. The US Attorney General Jeff Sessions said that it is a priority to prosecute WikiLeaks. In these circumstances, Julian Assange's case could have been resolved over 8 years ago without the immense cost to policing in this country, £12 million between 2012 and 2015, until the government classified that because it became an annoying fact to have to deal with. Why won't this government stand up to the US on free speech, give an assurance to protect Julian Assange from extradition, and save the British taxpayers all of this money?
Well, it wasn't the question that was put, but you're a lawyer and you choose how you'll answer any question, I suppose. But I do want to go back to Eloise Carter, who asked the question. What do you think of what Jen just said?
Well, I think that instead of focusing mainly on freedom of speech and stuff, that we should embrace the fact that he is the President of America and that we cannot change that, and that especially with going forwards with Brexit, that he's going to be even more important to us than ever before. So we should just embrace what we have to deal with now.
Okay, Caroline Lucas, do you agree with that?
On a great many levels, I do not agree with embracing President Trump. I can assure you of that. But I think this is a man who wages war by Twitter. He's refusing to engage in talks over nuclear weapons. He is undermining global climate discussions and pulling the US out of the climate talks. So I think he's a person who foments hate. He's building his famous wall. There are many good reasons why we should protest his policies. That is not to say that he shouldn't come here, and I'm sure that when he does, there'll be plenty of people on the streets showing the best of Britain and standing up for all of those groups that he rather wishes didn't exist. But I think what was quite interesting in just recent days was to watch that choreography between Macron and Trump. It was really quite toe-curling to see the picking of the dandruff off the jacket. But what struck me particularly was, the sort of spasm of existential angst that seems to come over the British establishment when we see another country that it seems to be taking what we believe is our rightful place as the other partner in a special relationship. And I really do wish that England in particular, because I think Scotland's got a bit more self-confidence, but I wish England in particular could just be a little bit more secure in itself and a little bit less anxious and needing to suck up to Trump, particularly in the context of Brexit. And what worries me there is that when we don't have all of the trade deals we currently have with the EU, we'll be even more dependent on Trump. And if we think we're going to get a decent trade deal out of him, I think we've got another thing coming.
Okay. So, Matt Hancock, that implies that Theresa May was a bit jealous of Macron's reception and the...
Well, I can put my arm around you as well, David.
Right, come on.
Of course we should, and we do accept that Donald Trump is the president. It's an incredibly important relationship. The relationship, of course, is much deeper than any one person. There's strong relationships at all levels, in government and amongst people. We have to make sure that we influence the strongest economy on earth. The United States kicked out more Russian diplomats than any other country in response to the Salisbury attack. There have been strong supporters when we've needed them recently in the face of Russian aggression. So we need to keep working with the Americans and with President Trump. And especially, as I didn't expect to say this, as I agree with Caroline on the point about post-Brexit, we need to be looking to the whole world. We need to be engaging with the whole world. We need to be trading with the whole world. Well, there was a bit of what you said I agreed with. And the crucial point is this. We need the self-confidence to be looking out to the world, to be entrepreneurial, and that means making sure that we're close to our greatest trading partner, which is the United States of America.
As a young Muslim living in the UK today, I don't see why I should have to accept him as my president. He's done nothing for me, he's done nothing for my community, he's done nothing for my family. All he does is spread his hateful rhetoric. It angers me, it saddens me, and most of all, it scares me that people think like this, that people have so much hate directed towards someone they don't even know. The amount of times that I have been called a terrorist is awful. It's disgusting. I see people looking shocked. I'm not even shocked. I think, how am I going to deal with this? I don't want to have a president here who adorns to all of these views, and I hate that I have to say that to people as well.
President Trump is acting like he's his own boss still. I mean, he's always run his own company, and that's the way he's running the United States. He appoints advisors and then he fires them. And he makes threats to people and he doesn't follow them up. But one of the good things that might have come out of his presidency so far is his threats to North Korea. And, you know, North Korea is now coming out a little bit. It took part in the Olympics. It's having meetings with South Korea, and it may be meeting President Trump. So if he's reduced the threat of a nuclear war caused by North Korea, then shouldn't we give him a bit of credit for that?
Diane Abbott, do you agree?
The United States is an important ally, whoever the president is. There's an enormous amount of cultural and social affinity between the British people and the American people. But when Eloise says, why do people keep knocking down President Trump? Nothing damages Donald Trump more than his own actions. Do people remember during the presidential campaign, Trump boasting about grabbing women by their private parts? Have people forgotten so soon his horrible anti-migrant narrative? A really poisonous narrative which I think comes across the Atlantic also. The idea that you have an American president that is coming away from dealing with climate change, the idea that you have an American president that gets up, tweets something, and in 48 hours we're bombing Syria, that is not the sort of leadership we've been accustomed to look for in America. So when you say, why do people knock him down? It's his actions and his attitudes which has made him so frightening to so many people in this country. And no, I will not be demonstrating against him, but people who do demonstrate against him coming here have every right to do so.
We have under 10 minutes to go. We have to have our traditional catch-up on where Brexit has got to, as we try through the fog and the murk to work out what on earth is going on. So I'm going to take this question from Iris Taylor. This is the thing they've been going on about all week and indeed yesterday. Iris Taylor, let's have your question.
Would staying in the customs union still deliver Brexit?
Yes, customs union was, as everybody keeps saying, not on the ballot when the country voted by 52% to leave the EU. So would staying in the customs union still count as Brexit? Matt Hancock.
Well, I think that we should leave the customs union. I voted Remain, but I said before the referendum that I'd accept its result. and I do. And the reason that I think that we should leave the customs union is because I want to have essentially free trade with Europe, but also free trade with the rest of the world. With America, which is growing fast, with the Far East, which is going gangbusters at the moment. And I want Britain to have that self-confidence, to be looking out to the whole world, to be able to strike trade deals of our own, as well as having good trade with Europe. Because it is this trade right around the world that generates jobs and prosperity and makes Britain what it is.
Just to clarify the point, if we stayed in the customs union, you would regard that as not leaving, not honouring the referendum?
I don't think that's the best way forward. I think the best way forward is to leave.
No, that's not quite what I'm asking. I'm not quite what I'm asking. You know the argument that's going on. If we were to find some form of remaining in a customs union, would that, in your view, be in defiance of the 52% who voted to leave the EU, or not?
My argument is that the best thing to do is have a good customs deal with the EU.
Yes, I know that.
Well, there you go. Well, I'll say it again if you want.
No, I just wish you'd answer my question. It's actually the question that was asked by Iris Taylor. Would staying in the customs union still deliver Brexit, yes or no?
Well, Brexit means leaving... Brexit is leaving the EU.
But is it leaving the customs union? That's what's arguing in Parliament, arguing today in Parliament, arguing in the Cabinet. Is staying in the customs union leaving the EU or not?
The reason that I'm answering the question in my way is because
That's a way of saying you're not answering the question.
Is because what we've got to do is get the best possible arrangements with Brexit. And the best possible arrangement is to leave the customs union and to strike a good deal with Europe and good deals around the world.
OK. Diane Abbott, will you have a go at it? Would staying in the customs union, from Labour's point of view, still count as Brexit?
We're very clear that we want to stay in a form of customs union. And there are good reasons for that. Business and manufacturing are terrified of us coming out of the customs union completely because they've got supply chains across Europe, and if there is no type of customs union, they're going to find themselves in a very problematic situation. There's also the question of Northern Ireland. The Tories have yet to come up with a solution to the Northern Ireland border which doesn't involve being involved in a type of customs union. The Labour Party respects the Brexit vote, but more than anything else, we want a Brexit which is good for jobs, good for people, good for the economy, and that means staying in a form of customs union.
And the single market too?
No, we're not talking about the single market, but you asked me about the customs union.
Yeah, I'm only throwing in the single market.
Yeah, well, you can try. No, a customs union...
Labour should be going further. Labour should absolutely be going further on this. And you know, what you've just said, Diane, is true of the customs union, but is even truer if you were to stay in the single market too. And to be honest, seeing Labour resile from that position, not actually standing up for so many communities that we know are going to be much worse off as a result of Brexit, I think is a real, real shame.
You, sir.
Diane made the point. During the referendum, I didn't hear any talk about the Irish border.
No.
It just wasn't considered, and it's one of the major things now that's come out in Brexit.
And what do you make of that?
I think it's a pig's breakfast. I don't think there's a solution. It's being kicked down the road, and it's still being kicked down the road.
Okay,
so to put the peace in Ireland at risk was never on the ballot paper.
Simon Evans.
I don't think staying in the Union would deliver Brexit as it was understood by the majority of people who voted for it. Obviously, it's subjective, but the people who voted for it, I suspect, intended us to be able to go and create new contracts and new deals with the world at large. I do hugely sympathise with the people Caroline and Diane are talking about who are terrified of what will happen if we leave a customs union or indeed the single market. I realise it will be an horrific amount of paperwork at the very least. I break a sweat when I need to apply for a new parking permit. So I completely have sympathy for that situation. But I think we need to show some courage and some spunk on this occasion. I think we need to get out there, take on a new adventure rather than limp off with a half-hearted version of the one we were already in and weren't obviously satisfied.
Okay. Jen Robinson.
Well, I think that raising the point of Northern Ireland drives home the point, both about the customs union and about every other part of this plan, is that this government doesn't have a clear plan. And Theresa May never had a clear plan. She is unwilling to go before Parliament and make a clear and persuasive case about each aspect of this plan. Whether we're talking about Northern Ireland, there is no solution for this. If we respect the rights that have been given under the Good Friday Agreement, constitutionally, I don't see how we can sustain the current devolved constitutional arrangements. Whether we talk about the Charter of Fundamental Freedoms, this government promised us that human rights would not be affected as a result of the Brexit. That was just not correct. And the only thing that is saving us from that is the fact the House of Lords exercised supervision over this and has insisted that if we are to have EU law apply in this country, that the Charter of Fundamental Freedoms will apply to protect us. It is an absolute dog's breakfast, and it is a shame that this country has had its constitutional structures pulled apart without a clear plan.
Okay. Yeah.
The point raised by you is very, very valid, and that is that...
By who?
Simon.
Yeah, Simon. Sorry.
Well-known Radio 4 personality.
Radio 4. Radio. Yes. Go on.
And that's that Brexit was a very subjective issue. It's different for each person. They interpret it differently due to the differing formats of the debate. And the thing is that the idea of Brexit, the terms and conditions, as it were changed very much from a day-to-day basis, depending on how the debate was going during the course of the referendum. There was no clarity put forward by David Cameron or by Theresa May. I think they should be held to account a bit more for the lack of judgment that they had then and are having now in not sorting out situations like the Irish border, which are so, so important.
And you want to come in? Do you agree with him?
Yes, I do. I think surely whether we leave the customs union or stay in, there's going to be a cost either way. There is no Goldilocks position on this, and I think if we leave, we will probably have to pay higher access tariffs to get into Europe, and if we stay, we will lose out on the option.
But do you think there's something defined called Brexit, which when people voted for it, they knew exactly what they meant, or do you think, like the man before you said, nobody quite knows what anybody meant?
I think, as has been said before, there was nothing on the ballot paper about the customs union in or out. There was nothing on about the Irish border. Those have emerged, and they are causing real problems for trying to move to a negotiated solution. In fact, at the moment, I can't see how it's going to happen.
OK, last word from Iris Taylor, if we can find you. Iris Taylor.
I haven't had a chance.
Have you not? Oh, you did speak.
I had a little tiny intervention.
Oh, all right. Well, intervene a wee bit more, but not too much.
Well, on the point that was just made over there, then I think what you've described is actually a very good case to have a people's vote on the final deal, because so much has become apparent that we didn't know before. But that is a very good reason. I mean, people are booing. Hey, shush, you're using my time up. I don't know why you're booing democracy. You know, what we're talking about here is your right to have a final look at the deal. And if you like the deal, then by all means stay in. But if you don't like the deal, then it should still be an opportunity to remain inside the EU. Simon talks about, we should have courage for this adventure. Well, it's all very well to have courage for this adventure if we're having perhaps the lifestyles that some of us do. But if you've got losing your jobs, if you're seeing your industries leaving your area, then that's not an adventure, that's a nightmare. And on Northern Ireland, how could we be so criminally reckless to be jeopardising the Northern Ireland Agreement? Putting it on the altar of an extreme Brexit. It is criminally reckless, and it should not be allowed to happen.
All right, you've got to stop because our time's up, I'm afraid.
There could be nothing worse for this country than going through that referendum debate again. We voted to leave and we got it.
OK. Time's up.
We were just getting started.
Yes. St Albans next week, and the week after that, Kettering, and on the screen there, how to get to those two places if you'd like to come. 0330 123 9988 is the number to call, or you can go to the website. Remember, this debate goes on, as always, on Radio 5 Live with Adrian Chiles, but because we've run rather over our time, let me just say thanks to our panel, thanks to all of you who came to Bury St Edmunds. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.